Friends, this is not a very pleasant subject, is it? How much does it cost to kill a man in war? So I think I ought to preface it by saying that there is a brighter side to the military than what we're going to show. And so let me pick up just a few little stories about soldiers before we get into the story of war. I remember at the close of the last World War, there was one soldier coming back from Europe on a ship, and he passed the Statue of Liberty as he came into the New York harbor. And he saluted it, and he said, "Lady, if you want to see me again, you'll have to turn around." I heard too of another soldier who was fighting in one of our more recent wars, which we'll not mention. And the commanding officer said to him, "This is a dangerous assignment. We're outnumbered 4-1, so fight." About a half hour later, he found this soldier leaning up against a tree, sleeping. He woke him up. He says, "Why aren't you fighting?" He said, "I killed my 4." I had a cousin whose husband was fighting across the sea in a war. He was a sailor, and he sent to her a photograph in which there were a number of sailors. And in the letter he said, "We're all going out to have a good time." Well, this friend of the family was with her and was looking at the photograph. And she got a magnifying glass. And she looked at the pictures of the sailors through the magnifying glass, finally satisfied herself, and sat down and wrote a letter to her husband. And it took her only 15 seconds to write it. This friend said, "Is that all you're going to write?" "Yes," she said, "that's all. Read it." Do you know what the letter said? "Where's your wedding ring?" At that checkpoint Charlie between East and West Berlin, there are all kinds of stories that are told, and one American soldier pulled a gag on the Russians, who were watching very carefully. Anyone who passed from one side to the other. Generally, the military could pass without much of an inspection. This particular day, this soldier was evidently concealing something, and he had his overcoat bunched in front of him, and the Russian said to him, "What have you got under your overcoat?" He opened it, and there were hundreds of little Russian dolls about that high. And the Russian said, "What are you doing with those?" He said, "These are dehydrated people, and when I get on the other side, I fill them up with water. It's the only way we can smuggle them out of Russia." There was at that same checkpoint, it seems, a man that every day for about a year was passing the checkpoint going into East Germany. And in his wheelbarrow, he had hay piled up about 6 or 8 feet high. And each day, the Russian let him pass. So, being naturally quick after 300 days, he said, "You must be smuggling something in." So he tore all the hay off the wheelbarrow. He said, "What are you smuggling in?" He said, "Wheelbarrows." Now, that's the lighter side. Now the serious side, and this is really serious. We're going to talk about various phases of war, and first of all, the rapidity of wars. How often do they come? I would advise you to get a pencil and write down some of these figures. Have you got your pencil? Now, here is the rapidity of some of the great wars of modern times with which we are very familiar. The rapidity between the Napoleonic and the Franco-Prussian War was 55 years. The interval between the Franco-Prussian War and World War I was 43. And the interval between World War I and World War II was 21 years. At a time when man has more and more of the material conditions for happiness, he's multiplying wars. There has been a war every 2.6 years of recorded human history. Of 185 generations, human generations, there have only been 10, just think of it, 10 out of 185 generations that have ever lived in warless days. Now, another way of looking at this is to take a bigger sweep. I don't want to make my angel work too hard. He's on union rules, and so I'm going to conserve his washings today. I'm going to give you the rapidity of wars in various nations in the last 500 years. How many times, for example, did Great Britain go to war in the last 500 years? 76 times. How many times did France go to war in the last 500 years? 61 times. How many times did Russia go to war? 63 times. Now, our history is not nearly that long, in that in our time there were 9 major wars. That for the rapidity of wars. That's not a superstition. There's a logic behind everything. As regards wars, we must speak of their tactics as well. And the most clever of all the nations today is Russia. Why is Russia more clever than any other nation, and particularly the United States? Well, when the United States goes to war, first of all, sends its armaments, its weaponry, and then it sends men. So we are really at war. What does Russia do? Russia sends its weapons, but not its men. It sends the guns, airplanes, cannons and bombers, but keeps the Russians at home. It finds dupes in other nations to do the fighting. That is why, when any other nation goes to war, Russia can always appear as the lover of peace. And why? It hasn't any men fighting. It just has guns fighting. Russians don't kill anyone. It's only their machines that kill. This is something we must keep in mind whenever we hear talk of peace. Now, as regards peace, what hope are we to find in leagues of nations, United Nations, and so forth? Certainly we must have them. But it's well to go back and just ask ourselves, how successful are peace treaties? Between World War I and World War II, when we had the League of Nations, do you think that nations were interested in peace? Certainly they were. So they were busy signing treaties of peace. We'll not go to war. How many treaties of peace did they sign? 4,568 treaties of peace between World War I and World War II. And the year before World War II started, how many treaties of peace? 211. In other words, there is not much confidence to be put in the pledged word. You get one divorce for every 4 marriages, and you get broken international agreements too. Now that's the relationship of peace to war. Now we come to the title of this telecast. How much does it cost to kill a man in war? Now the cost is going to vary, of course, as time goes on. But let's go back to the beginning. The first war certainly didn't cost very much. I mean, the war between Cain and Abel, all he had to do was just simply pull a branch off a tree and crack Abel over the head. Then the next weapon was a sword by Lamech. That probably cost a few cents in those days. But these were just wars between individuals. David fought Goliath, 5 stones and a slingshot. Now we come to some figures that were given to us by a Admiral Eccles, who made a study of this subject. Do you remember in high school when you studied the wars of Julius Caesar? Remember, all Gaul was divided into 3 parts. And remember his campaigns into Britain, into what is now France. How much did it cost Julius Caesar to kill a man? Are you guessing? $0.75. How much did it cost Napoleon sweeping through Europe? $700 a man. How much did it cost World War I? $21,000. Despite the fact that this was done on a wholesale scale. How much did it cost World War II to kill a man? $200,000. How much does it cost to kill a man? Or did it cost to kill a man in Vietnam? Here, it's a little different standard. It cost $1 million an hour. $1 million an hour. Suppose there are 24 men killed in a day. That's cost $1 million apiece. So you do your own arithmetic from this point on. And just read the number of men that are killed in any one day and divide that into 24 million, and you have your cost. What is our budget now for war? For war. 77 billion. $77 billion. How much for the reconstruction of our cities? 5 billion. Those are figures now that you can digest. Just think of how that money could be spent in other ways. Maybe in another telecast, we will give you some of the ways. Why do we keep it up? Well, fundamentally because there's a tremendous amount of selfishness, and also because there is probably, in our modern civilization, a great death wish. And today we're getting jittery about what? Oh, about nuclear energy. Throwing the earth off its axis. One single explosion. In 1949, Einstein was asked, "What do you think is the future of atomic energy?" He says, "Come back in 1969 and I will tell you." What was he thinking about? We're now at a stage in weaponry where one maniac can press a button. Nations are wiped out. Maybe the planet destroyed. Just a jittery man can do it. Happened once before. In the legend of the death of King Arthur, he and his son, Mordred, quarreled, then became bitter enemies. They organized armies. The kingdom was divided. Thousands of men lined up on either side. On these two opposing hills stood the army, one led by Arthur, the father, and the other by Mordred, the son. And they looked at one another and they thought, what are we going to do? Kill one another? Kill thousands? So they decided to sue for peace. Mordred and Arthur, with a few dozen soldiers from each side, met in the valley. And they agreed on a treaty of peace. And just as they were about to sign the treaty of peace, a poisonous snake wrapped itself around the leg of one of the soldiers. He took out his sword, cut away the snake. The blade of the sword flashed in the sun, and the men on both sides thought that war was declared. And they rushed at one another. And there were only 4 survivors. They had a case of jitters. Somebody had pressed a button. Is there much difference between the flash of a blade and the sunlight? The flash of the energy that has been Promethean-like stolen from the sun? May God avert the possibility of jittery men and the abuse of an energy that should be used for peace and not war.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
We'll try to have more pleasant subjects for you as time goes on, but every now and then a documentary full of facts. We had to get these facts into our heads, and we hope that we put them in yours in order that you will love peace and work for it. Thanks for listening. Bye now, and God love you.
Wrote to the TV editor of this paper with this problem.
Please, could you do something about changing Bishop Sheen's TV time? It comes on at the same time as the cavalcade of sports, which my husband wants to see. He gets his way. And in the meantime, a good program is lost forever from Bishop Sheen, and we fight and don't speak the rest of the evening. Now, he sees the cavalcade of sports, which is a fight program, and he fights with his wife. How many fights does he want a night? This is rather a difficult problem. I knew of a family that had a problem like it. They had a tiny little dog, and everybody wanted to play with the dog at once, so they exchanged it for a dachshund, so the whole family could pet it at once. Maybe the solution of the problem is for her to pray for a quick knockout, and then he'll turn over to our program. See, he has a trainer in his corner, and she has an angel in hers. But we'll try to make up for it. We will send to Mrs. McGuire a copy of all of the telecasts that she missed. This is the telecast of 2 years ago, and this is the telecast of last year. And we'll send both of these volumes so she'll get along well with her husband. And maybe the final solution might be inasmuch as Lent is coming on, for him to give up the fights, for her to give up Bishop Sheen, and both listen to Milton Berle. Well, we told you last week we were going to speak on the crises of the world, not from a political or economic point of view, but rather profoundly, in terms of has Christianity failed? That, of course, all depends upon what you mean by Christianity. There are certain types of Christianity that definitely have failed. And among those types, we will mention 3 forms of Christianity. The first is called the pink pill Christianity. The pink pill Christianity is one that substitutes a clinic for an altar. It gives an emotional glow that analyzes and inspires, but it never saves. It attempts always to give some kind of psychological thrill without in any way touching the soul of a man. Then, in addition to the pink pill Christianity, there is also ambulance Christianity. Ambulance Christianity runs after certain sick movements that need a bit of artificial respiration. For example, it gets behind art, science, the United Nations. There are some believers in ambulance Christianity who identify, for example, the kingdom of God with the defense of labor unions. And others identify the kingdom of God with capitalism. Finally, there is what is known as rumba Christianity. Now, I had to find out how to dance the rumba. I'm told that you move only from the hips down. Is that right? Well, if that is it, that's a very good explanation of a certain type of weak Christianity. Because the head does not move, nor the rest of the body, that means that there is considerable action without any thinking and without any deep sentiments of love. This is a kind of Christianity where if you write a nice article or you produce a good movie or you play a very good game of golf, you're supposed to be profoundly Christian. Now, these types of Christianity have failed, no doubt about it. And when Chesterton was once told that Christianity has been tried and found wanting, Chesterton's answer was, it has been found hard but not tried. I wonder if that's the real answer. It may really be that Christianity has been found easy and not tried. It's too easy. And the modern man is looking for something that demands sacrifice and a little discipline. gives him something so sublime that he might die for it. Presents to him an evil that ought to be despised, such a sin. And simply because there's been a weak kind of Christianity that's identified with psychology and science and sociology, there's been a terrific void in the world due to the loss of faith. And the world cannot live in a vacuum, so it fills it up. And there's been a filling up of this void in two different ways. The emptiness has been filled up one way by the Western world, and another way by communism. First of all, the Western world. The Western world has filled up the vacuum by the individual man entering inside of himself. It used to be, during the days of faith, that men lived in a great and tremendous universe. A universe of three dimensions. A universe in which, for example, there was heaven and hell, and in between, the earth, in which man had to novitiate and was given a moment of time in order to say aye or nay to his eternal destiny. Men moved out of this great universe. They moved inside of themselves, inside of their own head. That's like a human modern head. And heaven has become the superego. This has become what the Freudians call the id, and the earth is the ego. The result is that man is living inside of himself. He's almost like a serpent devouring his own tail. The modern man has a scalpel in his hand. And he's constantly probing, and digging at his own wounds without ever finding a healing. He's like one that is shot with bullets and feels that he can cure himself if he analyzes the bullet in order to discover if it was shot by Oedipus or by Electra. The modern man is like a ship that is beginning to sink. And he believes that if he makes an analysis of the water to determine its chemical constituents and origins, that he will thereby save the ship of self from sinking. Man's soul was meant to be like a cup. Cup lifted skyward. When it was raised by that voluntary act of man, God could fill it. But today this cup is upside down. Man has shut out everything else, the great environment of faith and divinity. He cannot fill the cup. Not even God can fill it. And he closes out the rest of the universe. And the modern poet has expressed this inversion, this passion for self-analysis, in these words which very well describe our modern man. I saw a creature, naked, bestial, squatting on the desert with his heart in his hand. And as he ate of it, I said, "Is it good, friend?" And he answered, "It is bitter." But I like it. Because it is bitter. And because it is my heart. It's a queer way of filling up the void and the emptiness that has come from loss of faith in our modern world. But it's not the only way. The communists have another answer. While in the Western world man turns inside of himself, the communists would have humanity turn back upon itself. And the communists say to the men of the Western world, you are discontented with your liberty, you talk of it, but you do not want it. And the reason you do not want it is because freedom implies choice, and choice implies responsibility. And you want to escape responsibility. That is what we do for you. You give us your freedom. Surrender your choice, so that from this point on there is no conscience but state conscience, no voice but party voice, no morality but totalitarian morality. You feel miserable, anxious, and fearful. You feel chaotic? We will organize all of this chaos of yours into a collectivity. For our socialism is nothing but the forcible organization of the chaos of your individual lives. And we will call this new party, this new mass, this collectivity, that is our God. And that is why we have to persecute. We have to. Because if you say you have a soul, then there's a part of you that does not belong to the state. Then there is a part of you that we cannot touch. So militant atheism is part of our program. And this is the way we fill up the void of the world. Those are the two answers of the world today. Are they hopeless? Should we despair? By no means despair. There is hope for both. First of all, there is hope for the modern man. For when the modern man goes down into the depths of his soul, he is in search of something. And what he is in search for is actually the limits of experience. He wants the extremes of living. And there he discovers that there are two extremes, either acceptance of God or defiance of God. He either there in the depths of his soul confronts God or he affronts him. One or the other. It is possible, as the Jewish psalmist said, cry out of the depths, de profundis clamaveate Domine. And this despair that the modern man has can be creative. Just as sickness can be creative when one sends for a physician. When the Western man says, I am hopeless, and then he looks for help, he is saved. He is not lost. This is not a despairing condition that our Western man is in. We are familiar, of course, with white grace, or the presence of God in the soul. But remember, there is also black grace. And black grace is the absence of God in the soul, or from the soul. And this loneliness, this fear, this anxiety, this terrific sense of isolation that he feels, this black grace is really the finger of God. It is stirring him unto uneasiness, so that if he does not come to divine beauty by standing on mountaintops, he can discover it out of the depths of his soul, as he hears in the language of Thompson, God speaking to him and saying, poor, piteous, futile thing, why should any set thee love apart? Seeing none but I make much of naught, he said. And human love needs human meriting, and how hast thou merited? Of all man's clotted clay, the dingiest clot. Alas, thou knowest not how little worthy of any love thou art. For whom wilt thou find to love ignoble thee? Save me. Save only me. And if there's hope for the Western man, there is hope also for the communist. I know. You say he's an atheist? Well, how many kinds of atheism are there? There are two kinds of atheism. One is the bourgeois atheism of the Western world, and the other is communist atheism. Bourgeois atheism is a denial of God based upon reading 15 pages of a comparative religion, reading some popularization of science, living under the illusion that one has read Darwin's Origin of Species, and a pretty good spicing of bad behavior. That is bourgeois atheism. Now, communist atheism is not of that kind at all. Communist atheism does not deny God. Communist atheism challenges God. The atheism of communism is an experience of God. Whence comes the fire, the militancy, the persecution, the hate, the violence of the communists against those who believe in God, if it be not the reality of God himself? Why these communists are not wasting their times on phantoms and ghosts and centaurs? They are witnessing by the very intensity and the impetuosity of their hate to the reality of that which they deny with their own lips. As one of our missionary workers in China was telling me, who was in prison for about 2.5 years. Communist guard would let her out to the prison yard by opening the door, just a few inches. She would have to scratch herself. She wormed her way out, and he would spit in her face every day. One day she said to him, "Thanks." Coming back a little while later into her cell, he said, "Why did you say thanks?" She said, "Because now I know how our Lord felt when he was spat upon." And the communist guard opened the cell door wide to let her in. And she noticed that the tears were streaming down his cheeks at the revelation that he had received. As the salt of her own righteous tears were witnessing to her own joy. This is the crisis of our modern world, and it can be summarized, everything that we've said, in terms of light. I wish I had a match, but it's not necessary. Don't bother. If I had a match, I would light it here, and you can visualize two products. One product of all fire is light, and the other product is heat. In the mind,